Hello friends, in today's video I want to talk to you about identifying the ghosts of your conditional permission. Now, in this space, in the recovery journey, we talk a lot about the importance of actioning your unconditional permission to eat. That is permission to eat that is free from condition, restriction, judgment, compensation, any of that. It is truly unconditional permission to eat. And in this video today, I want to encourage you to pay attention and call out the ways in which your previous conditional permission may still be showing up, as this is something that you need to proactively seek out and apply opposite action to in your recovery journey. And what I want to do in this video is to share with you a handful of the ghosts that I had to call out in my recovery journey in order to be able to push forwards with actioning my unconditional permission to eat. So the first ghost that I want to call out is that of jumping through hoops to permit or approve food. Now, this could look like so many different things, and I would be here for hours if I tried to explain all of them to you. But in short, it showed up in any situation where I noticed a pull to compensate around some kind of eating, to shift what I was doing in the now based on something that's coming later, or to change what I'm doing in the now based on something that came before. It could be restriction in the form of what I was going to eat, how much I was going to eat, the way or the time in which I was going to eat it. That restriction could show up in all sorts of different ways, but it looked like jumping through hoops in order to permit and provide permission to eat X, Y, Z. And the way that I noticed this as a ghost showing up in my recovery was that the me who was pushing forward and honoring my hunger and eating without restriction would notice thoughts bubbling to the surface, eating disorder suggestions coming forth around the idea of, oh, but if you're doing this later, then you need to do this now. I might get sudden influx of guilt or backlash around having done something in the now really freely, considering that last night I went and did X, Y, Z. That was how this ghost showed up. And it was quite simply that ghost of my previous engagement in compensatory behaviors to permit or allow myself to eat what I wanted, when I wanted, and as much as I wanted it. And so for me, calling out this ghost meant noticing where those compensatory behaviors showed up. It meant noticing where there were those thoughts or suggestions from my eating disorder centered on that compensation. And it meant very boldly in the now, coming back into the moment I was in and actioning my unconditional permission to eat without restriction. The next ghost that I want to call out is one that centers around that need to move or do, to exercise or be productive in order to provide permission to rest or eat. Now, this was one that showed up for me in so many different ways and shapes and forms in my recovery journey. But in general, what it required me to do was to acknowledge that inside my eating disorder, I had taught my brain through my actions that in order to permit rest, in order to permit eating X, Y, Z, there were things I had to do, boxes I had to tick from a productivity or movement/exercise perspective. And in recovery, that showed up as a ghost in the form of guilt or resistance when I was taking the opposite actions to those previous behavioral choices. Now, that resistance and guilt sometimes just gently bubbled away in the background. Sometimes it came and it knocked me sideways. Sometimes I could be just merrily moving through my day, and before I know it, suddenly I'm hit with this truck of guilt and dread and feelings of wrongdoing. And that was this ghost. That was this ghost of my conditional permission to rest. And I had to recognize that the feelings I was experiencing were being created and caused by that ghost. And I had to get really honest with myself and recognize that what I had to do in the now was acknowledge this and then continue to act in alignment with recovery. I had to keep on doing that resting. I had to keep on leaning into the things that felt unproductive and lazy. I had to really lean in to the spaces where it was uncomfortable. I had to shelve various different hobbies and activities. I had to say no to things in order to be able to prioritize the work of recovery. And for me, as I say, this ghost showed up in lots of different ways and shapes and forms, from more formal movement compulsions to lower level movement presentations to just a drive to generally be doing or have achieved something. And I really had to notice and call out that ghost of my previous conditional permission. And I had to act in alignment with my unconditional permission to rest and my unconditional permission to eat in and alongside that resting state. Now, the next ghost I had to call out was all around a variety of different ritualistic behaviors that I engaged in to provide permission to eat. And again, these took very many different forms, a handful of examples being this tendency to want food to be hot. If a meal was hot, I needed it to be really hot, and I would find myself getting very anxious and obsessive about making sure that that meal was as hot as it could be prior to sitting down. And that would often look like me going backwards and forwards between the table and the microwave far too many times. That was an example of the ghost that was an example of this ghost. Another example was my tendency to need to have been to the toilet fully and completely prior to sitting down to a meal or prior to eating. Again, I recognize some of these are incredibly niche, but I'm sharing them to give insight to the fact that these ritualistic behaviors, the things that can be ghosts of your previous conditional permission, can take so many different forms. If I reflect back, the truth is inside my eating disorder, there were all sorts of different ritualistic behaviors that I engaged in, things that I had to do in order to be able to feel a sense of permission to then sit down and eat, or to sit down and rest. And in recovery, I had to notice where the ghosts of that conditional permission showed up. I had to notice where there was this tendency to want to heat things up. I had to notice where there was this tendency to want to go backwards and forwards to the toilet. I had to notice where there was this pull in the direction of doing those various different things that I previously had to do in order to permit the resting or the eating that I wanted to do. I had to notice where there was that pull in that direction, and I had to step back and acknowledge why that was there, where that was coming from, and what I needed to do in the now in order to carve a path in the direction I wanted to go. And quite simply what that looked like was applying opposite actions and making myself sit down and rest and eat without having engaged in those various different ritualistic behaviors. The next ghost that I had to call out was in my fear of being too full. This would show up as a resistance to eating or taking action in the now because of XYZ that was happening later, and that if I did this now, if I honoured my hunger unconditionally now, then I might not be hungry for that thing later. I might not therefore enjoy it as much later. And the truth was, I had to, as I've spoken about in a number of videos on this channel, I had to get honest with myself about in the now where engaging in that behaviour would actually lead me. The me that went, yeah, okay, I'm not going to eat without restriction now so that I can do that thing later. Where did that lead me? That very much, 100% fed into my eating disorder. It reinforced conditions on my permission to eat, and therefore it went distinctly in the opposite direction to my recovery. It went distinctly in the opposite direction to where my recovering self wanted to go. And so I had to call it out. I had to challenge this ghost of my previous conditional permission. I had to show my body and myself compassion for the fact that my body had learnt that in order to be able to have permission to eat XYZ, it needed to jump through hoops. It needed to feel a certain level of hungry. And so the ghost of this showed up in recovery, where I would notice fear, and very real fear, around if I do this now, then I won't be able or allowed or permitted to do XYZ later. If I eat in this way now, if I eat without restriction in this moment, then I won't enjoy that thing later. And the truth was, what lay behind that was not a core self innocent thought. It was a deep-rooted biological fear and learnt mechanism of behavior associated with a conditional permission to eat. And I had to get honest with that, and I had to come back into the now, and I had to say very firmly to myself, what is happening later is happening. All of those things you're thinking about right now, the dinner that you want to choose, the pudding that you want to have, the size of popcorn that you want at the cinema, the extra large Candy King tub that you want to get from the supermarket, all of those things are permitted and they are going to happen. And in the now, you are going to action your unconditional permission to eat, and you are going to eat without restriction in the here and the now. And that is what I had to do time and time and time again to rid myself of the ghost of that conditional permission. And the final ghost that I want to call out is the ghost of the imperfect environment. Now, again, for me, this did show up in a variety of ways. Sometimes it was about the place that I was sitting, wanting to be in the seat that I'm usually in. Sometimes it was about the crockery or cutlery that was available, the stuff that felt like that's the stuff I like to use, that's my favourite spoon. Sometimes it was about the vibe or the environment emotionally. It was that I felt uncomfortable eating if people had been having an argument or if there was any level of stress or unease in the place. Sometimes it was about there being jobs left to do, things that hadn't been done, boxes that hadn't been ticked. And here is where it overlaps a little with that earlier ritual-based ghost. But it was really about recognizing where I had taught my brain and body that in order to have permission to eat and or rest, the environment needed to be just so. The times where I delayed eating because people were present in the space when I wanted it to be quiet. The times where I delayed eating because my favourite bowl or my favourite spoon wasn't available. The times where I delayed eating because some people were having a discussion that was just irritating to me. The times where I delayed eating because somebody wanted to watch something on the television that just didn't make the environment quite right. The times in which I delayed eating because I hadn't done the jobs that I felt I should have done, or that there was washing on the side, or that the washing machine was going on in the background. The breadth and depth of where this ghost showed up was significant. And the truth is, in recovery, I had to get honest about how and where that ghost was showing up in my resistance to eat in certain environments and at certain times, and to challenge myself head on with opposite actions, aka eating when there was chaos all around me, eating when people were having a heated discussion, eating when the TV show that was on was really irritating me, eating with very different bowls and plates and cutlery, eating when there were jobs that needed to be done and that were irritating me. I had to make myself sit in that discomfort and push through the ghost of that conditional permission to show my brain through my actions that those conditions were no longer relevant. The environment didn't need to be perfect any longer in order for me to have permission to eat and rest. And that was something that I had to teach my body and brain through repeated, consistent, proactive action taking. So, in short, I really encourage you to get curious about where the ghosts of your conditional permission may be showing up. And as always, because this is not just a listening and thinking and talking space, this is a doing space. I encourage you to gather up that awareness and to go and take action based on it. So let me know in the comments below if this video has been helpful. I'd also be really curious to hear the ghosts that you identify and the ways in which you are going to attack them. And as always, thank you so much for your love and support on this channel. It really does mean the world to me. Until the next time, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, have a wonderful day. And I look forward to speaking to you in the next one.